It is time for yet another episode of Life Stories Unscripted podcast. Welcome, everyone. I'm your host, Viviane. I'm a certified doula, breastfeeding, and newborn care specialist, and I talk about everything from preconception, pregnancy, birth, postpartum, and beyond, including breastfeeding and infant troubleshooting. So if you're a parent or you're trying to be one, this is the podcast for you. So stay tuned. Lots of juicy stuff coming up. Today, our guest is Zuzana Svepešová, who is located in London. She is a dating/relationship coach and psychologist, and together we'll tap into attachment, more precisely relationship attachment and how it relates to pregnant women. Very exciting. Last but not least, if you like this podcast and you feel it resonates with you, please hit the subscribe button. I would very appreciate that, so we can spread awareness together. Finally, this episode is sponsored by Perfecta Placenta, located in Beverly Hills, which is a placenta preserving company. So if you would like your miracle organ to be preserved and get a stretch mark cream and a diaper bag, don't forget to use my promo code Doula Viviane. And for more information, hit me up. So that's it. Let's jump into it. I am excited. Here's our guest. Here's the episode. Enjoy. Hi, Susie. Thank you.
Hello. Hi, Vivi.
How are you?
I'm very good. Thank you. Enjoying the sunshine. Very well. Thanks. Yourself?
Good. I'm good. We have rain and cold and wind, so
it's cooled down finally.
Right. But I'm very excited for today, and I can't wait to dive into this with you. So
Likewise. I'm really excited myself. I think the topic we just going to dive into today is just fantastic and so I would say omnipresent everywhere, because each of us is in some kind of relationship. So we're going to talk about that and how attachment is affecting all that. So yes, very, very exciting. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome, and thank you for being here. So tell us a little bit about yourself. I did a brief introduction, but you can elaborate on that a little bit. So who are you?
Sure. Thank you. So I am a psychologist and a dating coach, and I help professional women over 30 who are all around the world. I'm online based, so I can help people all around the world to basically meet their soulmate, meet their Mr. Right, and go and pursue the relationship they want and to be loved for who they are. So what I do with my clients is that we look not just on the outside or the external part of dating and like what dating app to go on, literally what to do on the outside, where to go for a date and stuff like that, what is acceptable, what isn't acceptable, what red flags to look for, and so on. But we also look into the internal part of dating, and that is, how confident a person feels about showing up, asking for what they want, because the part of a huge reason why person can struggle in relationships and dating, the reason why we're attracting not the best people for us is there is either some kind of fear, fear of being rejected, fear of being alone, which I think we're going to tap into today, but also it's a level of self-esteem, which also is connected to what we're going to talk about today, because it's connected to how we see ourselves and how we perceive others, right? So these are all the things that we dive into with my clients, so then they can, show up and embrace their self-worth, and they can have that courage to ask for what they want, so they are not settling for less, and so that they can, manage disagreements. Sometimes we're getting ghosted, but also last but not least, like to have ability to break up and to let go of people who don't, serve us and who we are not a good match with. So yeah, in a nutshell, these are a few things that I help my clients with and what we do when we work together.
Wonderful. That sounds also amazing. It sounds like you're doing a great service to everyone who you work with. And I would agree. It taps a lot into what we're going to talk about today. So yeah, let's just do it. So
let's do it.
Yeah. So I said briefly that we're going to be talking about attachment, and specifically attachment in a relationship from a woman's perspective, and what to look out for, what attachment is, and what different types of attachments there are, and just what to know and what to look out for.
Yes. Okay. Well, I guess, where shall we start? Shall we start with what attachment is? Because I can imagine maybe there are lots of literature, and lots of stuff online, and so maybe some of your listeners and people who are watching, maybe they are familiar with it, maybe they came across it, but they're not entirely sure what it means. So I guess
So how about we do it like I'm your client and I have no idea what attachment is, and I'm struggling. I don't know if I'm struggling. So what is attachment? What does that mean? What do I visualize under when I see that word?
Sure. So what is attachment? So basically, as you're growing up, as you're very little, as you're born, there is a bond which is creating between you and your mom or dad. Or what I like to use, the word I like to use is primary carer, because sometimes it's not your mom or dad, sometimes it's your grandma, grandpa, or a carer, right? So it's a bond that is created between you and that primary carer. And so it's all about the level of love, care, and protection, and the proximity which you have with that person. And based on the level of, or the environment you're growing up in, then you develop a certain image, so to speak, of yourself and the image of others. But also you feel a certain level, depending on what's happening for you as you are growing up, level of trust and love. So these are one of the main elements. So, and there are four main attachment styles, which and we all have an attachment style. It can be either one, which is very dominant, or it can be a mixture of two normally, but one is normally more dominant. So we can, when you're using a test to do that, or you speak to a professional, normally there are quite clear signs that one is dominant. So there are four different types, and they are anxious attachment style, avoidant attachment style, dismissive or fearful attachment style, and secure attachment style. But we'll dive deeper into those, I guess. So this would be attachment in a nutshell, right? So depending on how you're growing up, you learn things and you develop the image of yourself and others.
Wonderful. A question came up for me. So if someone's watching this, can someone say to themselves, all right, so I have a type of attachment. Can I figure it out on my own? Is there a test I can take online, or do I have to reach out to someone?
There are tests available online, on the websites, but you can also reach out to a professional. What I would say is that, because nowadays, and there are plenty of books, and they have tests where you can pretty accurately find out what attachment style you have. For example, one of the books I would highly recommend is called Insecure in Love, right? But I think that's more specific to anxious attachment style. However, it talks about other attachment styles as well. And there are lots of workbooks as well that can help you to do that. However, what I would say is that simply knowing and identifying what attachment style you have is, I would say, it's just like opening that can of worms, because suddenly you see that, okay, I have this attachment style. Now what, right? You can suddenly can start seeing clearer why you have it, where it was created. But by this point, when you're an adult, because it was being created when you were little, all these things, all these ways of thinking, feeling, and behaving are now deeply ingrained in you, and they show up in the way in the form of habits and patterns, right? So it's great to the first part I would say like discovering, okay, identifying this is what I have, this is the attachment style. But then the question that often comes up is, now what? How do I change this? If we feel like, okay, this doesn't work for me, right? How do I change this?
So can one assume that if they're securely attached, that there is really nothing, there is no can of worms, or, you know, how, because you're the one who knows best, right? So if a person takes a test or reaches out to someone and they found out they're, oh yeah, I'm securely attached, so I'm okay. Is that the only attachment style where you are sort of good and you don't have to really think about it, or is there always a space to grow? What would you say? What are your thoughts?
That's a great question. I think there is sometimes, or maybe some of your viewers or listeners may have come across this, that if you can only have a good relationship or quality relationship when you're secure, right? When you're confident. You can have a beautiful and strong relationship even if you have avoidant or anxious or fearful attachment style. What's important is to be aware of it, but at the same time taking responsibility for managing it and sort of heading towards being more secure and being curious, like, okay, how do I respond in a more secure way? But also I would say that the fact that you have secure attachment style, that doesn't mean that you never face any difficulties in your life or in your relationships, or you will never meet anyone online who is going to ghost you. What it means is that and obviously people with secure attachment style, they have their challenges, you know. That doesn't mean that their life is a linear line and they have no obstacles whatsoever. They need help with their own things, right? But what is different between someone who's got secure attachment style and the other three remaining insecure attachment style is the way how this person see themselves, like how capable they are to deal with these things, you know, like to deal with challenges in relationships and in challenges within themselves, how possible things are for them, you know. Whereas when it comes to insecure attachment styles, which are the remaining three, we often learn as children that we either not capable, we are not good enough, right? So, and then this translates into how we approach dating, how we approach relationships, marriages, right? Imagine you feel like you're good enough and you are choosing a partner to you know, to commit to. If you feel like you're good enough, you are going to be able to set your clear boundaries, and you're going to be able to ask for what you want, say no when you feel no, right? And that means that you're going to create a completely different relationship from a relationship where you feel like you are not good enough and you are looking for partners who validate you. Then you're becoming codependent, you becoming dependent on the external factors, which then leaves you helpless and helpful, because you're not regulating how you feel yourself, but you're always waiting for someone else to say something, to do something, or something else to happen, right? So these would be some of the differences.
Thank you so much for explaining. There's so many questions that are coming up for me right now. But one of them is, so if you're not securely attached, is that, or would you say, is that a sign for someone to be alarmed if they think that they're okay? Like you said, that they're waiting for, to be allowed to talk for example, in a relationship or in a situation, right? If that person is not aware of that, if they think that that's how it should be because that's how they were raised and they feel secure, right, quote unquote, but even if they're not, is that, is that something to be alarmed by?
That's a good question, because I think we're different when it comes to, that's a good question. And so I guess that the one word you mentioned is the key here, and that's the awareness, right? Because our attachment style is like a second skin. We don't realize that it's that's causing troubles in our relationships until we actually pause and ask ourselves that, okay, things just seem to be happening over and over again. It's always the same thing. I always end up feeling the same. What's going on, right? Because what's happening with attachment styles, we develop like an autopilot. We'll learn to be a certain way. We learn to say certain things, certain things, behave in a certain way. So exactly like you said, some people often describe it as, this is just who I am, right?
Right.
Whilst we all are like a bunch of habits and patterns, right? Obviously, we can discuss about nature versus nurture, right? There is some genetic disposition. However, environment affects it a lot, right? So we learn to function a certain way, and some people live their lives and they never wonder about why my relationships are not working, what's going on. They simply just remain oblivious to that, or they don't want to look into that. That's there are also reasons for that. Sometimes it's easier not to do that, because then we know we are going to have to open that can of worms. But I think the main reason is taking responsibility, because if you want to change something, that means you have to do the work. You have to take responsibility. And sometimes it's easier to say like, oh, it's the dating apps, or it's men, or it's women, right? Rather than pausing and stopping. How am I contributing to this? What's happening? Because you are part of the whole process, right? So I would say it starts from that individual, you know. There is a phrase, nothing changes unless you do, right? And so it can be alarming for some people, but for some people, they literally live their whole life without ever wanting to explore, you know. And maybe you meet people who are more mature, and they go like, I'm not going to bother now, I'm not going to change now, I've lived like this for 50-60 years, why would I bother now, right?
And I'm fine, just no major,
absolutely.
right?
And that's absolutely fine, you know, like not everyone is up to this process, because it's as I mentioned, that in order to change, you basically have to change, and it has to be something within you. And obviously there are things that you can't control, you can't choose, but it's also this awareness that, okay, I can now focus on what I can choose, you know, what am I responsible for, you know. But just going back to the beginning, as I said, in order to do that, you first have to stop and literally pause and just get curious, because we just go. It's an autopilot. That's the definition. You don't think, you don't have to stop. It just keeps you going. But if we realize that we are not in the place we want to be in our relationships, that we constantly, let's say, unhappy, unfulfilled, we struggle to find the right person, or our relationship is not really working well, there is no balance, one thing I would encourage everyone who's listening and watching to go from is to go from judgment, because we tend to judge ourselves, maybe because we've learned that from our carers, primary carers, or society, right? Or some dogma, to go from that to go into curiosity and really start asking yourself, okay, where is this coming from? How am I contributing to this process? You know, this is where the transformation is starting, because unless you're aware, unless you know what you're dealing with, you can't really deal with it, you know. But once you open that can of worms, you can see it. You can then see what needs to be done, or you can look for someone who can help you with that.
Right. It's something to be worked with, right? Once you open it. So,
Definitely.
so if so there's a question that came up for me again. If someone if someone's listening, watching, and they're asking themselves, okay, I would like to know what my patterns are, or whether my patterns are a bit toxic to me in the long run, in the, you know, in the long game, what questions should that person ask themselves to find out whether there actually is a pattern that is hindering or limiting to them, and they, you know, they could do so much better. So what would you say, what would you say the questions, or if there are any questions?
Mm-hmm. There is plenty, in fact, and they normally come up in the process, depending on from which angle you look at it as a person, because you can approach it from the position of fear, or because for most of the people, we don't know, like I would say, unless you came across the book or someone told you about attachment style, we don't know it's an attachment style, right? We normally describe it in terms of I'm scared, or I don't feel confident, right? So, but all these things are connected to, specifically when it comes to relationships, to attachment style. So what questions to ask yourself? So, okay, so because I want to be more general, so it applies to every single attachment style. I would say more so to the insecure ones, because I think if you have a secure attachment style, you probably don't feel that need to explore that as much, but you may want to. So one of the first questions I would ask myself, if I can see that I am not in my love life, in my relationships where I want to be, or in my life in general, but specifically in relationships, that question would be, what is happening over and over again in my love life or in my relationships? What is the pattern I'm noticing that's happening over and over again? What can I see happening with every single man I go out with, right? Or how do I feel every single time when I'm trying to raise an issue with my partner? What's coming up? Do I always feel like I can't speak up, that I don't know how? Do I feel scared? Right?
Right. Or is
So
everything
what?
okay, right? Like, am I, you know, I'm confident, he listens, he's empathetic, everything is how I would like it to be, right? Rather than, oh, wait a second, like he does not, or, you know, whoever they are, they are not letting me speak. They're not wanting to listen.
Yeah, absolutely. So whatever that is, and there is no right or wrong answer here. What this question itself is doing is inviting you to start really paying attention to yourself and what's happening, because what your attachment style is doing is, once again, it's an autopilot. So unless you stop and really get curious, you can't see it, right? So for you, in order to be able to see the pattern, you need to stop and first question like, okay, so what's repeating itself? Because as we go and we can say like, oh, I'm just going to go for another date, I'm sure it's going to be different, it's a different guy, right? Or it's a different partner. But because we are habitually, for example, seeing ourselves as not good enough, this will manifest in a certain way. It will manifest in a way that you will feel like you can't disappoint your partner, right? So even when they contact you last minute, you're going to cancel all your plans and you're just going to go and meet them because you can't bear the idea of being rejected and them not liking you, right? This, for example, is a sign of anxious attachment style. So, but if you notice that this is happening all the time, then that's a telltale sign for you that, okay, there is a pattern. And so once you identify this is a simple question, but and it may sound like a no-brainer, but it's literally it's just to check in with yourself. Is this helpful for me or is this not helpful for me? Because we are on autopilot, we do it, and we may, like you mentioned previously, we may feel like this is just who I am, right? And when you think like, okay, this is just how I behave, well, no, it's not. This is how you are most likely being indoctrinated or taught how to communicate or not communicate, right? So once you identify this, you ask yourself, is this helpful for me?
Right.
Or is this not helpful for me? Right?
Absolutely.
So, and so most likely you discover like, okay, this is not helpful for me. Okay.
Right.
Another question is, okay, so what needs to change?
So what if that person, what if that woman is pregnant and she is expecting a baby and she's in a relationship and she happens to pause and stop because you have the time, right? When you're pregnant, your ankles are swollen, you sit up, you put your legs up, and you just start thinking, right? Which can be a good and bad thing depending on which route you go. But let's say she does open the can of worms and she starts realizing, okay, wait, I am having a baby with this person I dearly love and I care about them, but I don't feel the needs or, that the love language is being, that it's there. They don't feel it. Is there something that can be done about this?
Definitely, which is good news. And the first thing is for that mom or to literally pause and become aware like, okay, there is an issue. I no longer feel comfortable with this happening, right? That my needs are not being met, right? I want things to be different.
Right.
So what I highly recommend here is, because at that point you are in a relationship, right? And you're with your partner. So I highly recommend to have a conversation with your partner, right? Because sometimes we all have needs, right? And we expect, there is something called, it's cognitive distortion, and we expect other people to read our minds, right? So we have those needs and we get frustrated when those needs are not being met, whilst we don't communicate them ourselves. Now, just taking a step back, sometimes we don't know what these needs are, which is okay. And the reason may be because we were never allowed to explore what our needs are, right? We were always told to people please others, so our needs went out of the window. So now, as we are, maybe if you perhaps read a book, come across a video, or you work with a professional and they ask you, okay, so what is it that you want, right? that person either may not know, or they are really scared to express that, because they've learned that to ask for what they want is not good, right? They have to listen and they have to obey other people in order to be liked, right? So it's not acceptable to say that. So one thing is, so it starts from the awareness. I recognize that I no longer like where I am at, and I want things to be different. In a relationship, one thing that you need to do if you want things to change is to communicate this to your partner. But what helps is to get clear on what your needs are. So what I, for example, do with my clients is a very simple exercise, is where you take A4 paper and you divide it in half in the middle, and you write down, you can write down as many things as you like, but I would encourage them to start with their top 5 things that they must have in that relationship, in order to feel fulfilled, to feel happy, and for it to last. And then there are 5 things that are total no-goes, like a deal breaker, right? So just by doing that, they can clearly see what their needs are, what they need. And as they have it written down, it will make it easier to then communicate it to their partner. They get clear on, okay, these are the things I like, and if they want to go even further, they can really, it will take a little bit of time, but it's well worth it to look into each of them and ask themselves, why does this matter to me? Right? For example, if you want respect from your partner, why does it matter to me? Right? So before you have that conversation, this is quite helpful to know, so that you know what you want to communicate to your partner, right? And then talking to your partner, right? Checking in, like, honey, I would like to talk to you about something. Do you have time right now? That's an important thing as well, because sometimes we're jumping into conversations without, which can be very triggering and emotional, especially in situations like this, where this can be very transformational and something will be shifting in relationship. Just first check in with that person,
Right.
Are you ready for that? I would like to talk. Do you have time right now? Yes, fantastic. No, when would be good for you? And then just bring it up. And here we're going into conversation. What's very useful, and that will help you to prevent the other person to take it personally or take it in the wrong way, as you're having possibly emotionally charged conversation, is to use I statements. I feel X, Y, Z, and to use clear examples. So definitely communicating this with your partner. But first of all, getting clear on what is it that is happening for you and what you would like instead. So then you can see where your partner is. So once you share this with them, you can ask them, okay, what are you hearing? Right? How can you do this together?
Absolutely. Amazing. Yeah. And is it possible for a person to think that what they need, what they write down on a paper, that it's actually not what they need, but they think of it as them being spoiled? Can that be a sign or an indication to this is the actual need, but it's never been learned, it's never been seen, so it's perceived as this type of, of a type of being spoiled? Is that real? Can that happen?
Absolutely. Especially, for example, with people who have avoidant attachment style, which briefly are people who most likely grew up in an environment where you were told that, for example, don't cry, I give you the reason to cry about, right? So we start shutting down our emotions, and and we become very independent, right? And parents provide us with material things. However, there is very little or no emotional support, right? So then when we ask for support from our partner, we suddenly feel like, no, I can't do it. This is not right. Okay. Or maybe you've learned from your parents, like, oh, I gave you food and I gave you, you had a roof over your head. Why are you still moaning? Right. And we've learned like, okay, so to be loved means to have food on your plate and to have roof over your head, basically, right? And we've learned that emotions have nothing to do with love, right? And in fact, if you express your emotions, it's bad, you're weak, possibly, right? So why? And then you get into a relationship and you start getting closer to someone and you feel like, whoa, no, I'm out of here. This is unfamiliar. Yes. Okay, so the next two, I'm not going to be referring as much to secure attachment style, because that's normally people who are having troubles in their relationships, that they're not usually securely attached. So so I'm going to talk about anxious and fearful attachment style. Fearful attachment style is combination of avoidant, when you have those avoidant tendencies, that you're independent, you don't like to express emotions, and then there is the anxious attachment style. And when you ask like that, sometimes we can feel like, okay, I need these things, but I feel like you may be feeling guilty for asking them. So that's very typical for someone with anxious attachment style. And why that is that you most likely grew up in an environment where you were taught to let others speak first and to just follow what you were taught. So you learned that what you think, feel, and what you do is not as important, or is more like secondary, right? So you learn to, or perhaps, let's say you learned to adjust your emotions based on how your mom and dad or your primary carer was behaving. Sometimes parents, or maybe your parents were not, they were not able to handle their own emotions for one reason or another, which then put you in a position where you had to learn to adjust to how they were feeling, right? That means that your emotions, your needs were not met, right? You always had to go by what someone else was doing. And also you learned that I'm only liked when I'm doing what other people want, right? So suddenly when you're in a position where someone asks you, what is it that you want? And then you can be said, someone can say, well, just ask for it, right? Well, it's a bit more problem, like challenging than that, because you were taught for, let's say, 30 odd years that it's not okay to ask for what you want. It's not even important, right? So suddenly you're in a relationship and you are pregnant, expecting mom, and you decide that you would love your partner to listen to you a little bit more, or maybe you want to have a conversation with him every single evening, or you want you to go on a date once a week, right? So but you really, what comes up for people with anxious attachment style, when they are faced with this and they know like, okay, so what I need to change is to actually ask, is fear, right? And fear of the end guilt, right? I'm feeling guilty, because what they learn is to people please, right? So, and what also goes hand in hand with that is lack of boundaries. So we don't know how to say no. And when you invite them to set those boundaries, there is often a huge sense of guilt, right? I can't do that. I can't hurt that person, whilst at the same time they're hurting themselves by completely ignoring their own needs, right? So what, for example, I do with my clients is where I would invite anyone who's listening and watching, what I would invite them to do is to um, go into, and I just lost my train of thought now.
I'm sorry. But can I jump in? I have something came up for me.
Sure.
So is it possible for, because you tapped on fear, right? So if a person is asked, what do you want? And they have this opportunity to, for the first time sometimes, to express what they want, essentially expressing their needs, can it be possible that they can't for some reason because the fear plays such a big role?
I would say that's the main reason.
Really? Oh, okay.
Right? Because why in life in general, why do you do or not do things? Right? I mean, obviously, okay, there is another reason we don't do things that we don't consider important, right? Okay, so if I don't value something, if I don't think it's important, I'm not going to be, drawn to do and to pursue it. So that's another area. Okay, so that's maybe the second reason. But when it comes to this, when we feel like discomfort in a relationship where that mom is, let's say, scared to express her needs or feels guilty, that is coming from that fear. Okay, and that fear is connected because it's connected to what she learned about what's acceptable, what will happen when she says what she wants. She's learned that she will most likely be shut down, so she should just say nothing, right? So it's yeah.
Almost, I'm sorry, it's almost she justifies the fear, or the fear is making her justify that she doesn't really need anything, because even if she said something, she would be shut down.
Absolutely. So this is what we call, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it stems from a belief. And going back to what we've talked about is that every single attachment style is a set of not just habits and patterns, but also, well, patterns in thinking. So certain set of beliefs, right? And believe, whatever you believe, your mind will do everything to look for the evidence. So if you believe that you know that it's wrong to ask for what you want, this is where the self-sabotage comes. We're going to stop ourselves from asking for it. We're going to assume, we're going to be resentful towards our partner, whilst the actual core of this is, what am I believing about what I can and can't do, right? Where did I learn this? Right. Is this thought mine, or is this something I heard from my mom, or who told you this, right? So this is where the line of questioning starts, and that curiosity, like, okay, what's happening there? But this is fear, and it's literally a cycle. It comes from the belief, it comes from the thought creates the feeling, and however you feel, you then do or don't do things, right? And when you do or don't do things, then you get a result, right? And that result, usually based on your belief, confirms your belief. So absolutely, what you said is that, right?
Absolutely mind-blowing.
Right? So
yeah, I mean, it's mind-blowing, because we are going from attachment to fear to self-sabotage to self-fulfilling prophecy, and that's, a lot of new words. And it, and it's leading us to this whole other topic of fear, right? And how fear plays a big role in us becoming better version of ourselves, essentially, right? By allowing and accepting that fear to manifest itself and to work with it, right?
Absolutely. I think I love what you said, and that's bringing that, or looking at fear as something that is happening for us rather than against, right? Because often, again, whether we're indoctrinated that way, right, especially when you're avoidant, when you have avoidant attachment style, negative emotions, some people are told like, oh, you can't be upset or something, you only have to smile, right? So reframing the concept of fear or negative emotions, when you're scared, when you're guilty, right? And again, approaching them from a place of, what is this emotion here to tell me, right? So there are a whole lot of tools and ways how one can work with it. But like you said, this is I think the topic that another area we can just talk about and dive into. Yes, it's connected to attachment style big time, but I think it's a topic on its own, fear and how to manage it and make it work for you, basically.
Right. So so to wrap this topic of attachment up, what are the main takeaways from this? What should I, as a person who came across this for the first time and I'm feeling maybe there is a can of worms, what should I take away?
Mm-hmm. One thing, and this may sound like a cliche, but I really want to say it. Often when we open that can of worms and we discover that we've been engaging in some kind of automatic pattern, which wasn't our choice, there are emotions that come up. Very often there is anger, there is sadness. We realize that we had no choice when all this was being basically set up for us, right? So one of the first thing and takeaway I would say is that there is nothing wrong with you when you discover, because we may think like, oh, well, you see, I've been like doing all of this wrong. Like I'm useless, I'm not good enough, right? There is nothing wrong with you. You have done your best, right? And because if you knew how to do things, you would do them differently. So you've done your best and there's nothing wrong with you. Second thing, I would say, when you do decide to change things and you notice that you want to do things differently, you want to have a different kind of relationships with yourself and with your partner and with your child, which is on its way, because then you're going to be passing those things on to your child. Approach it from the place of curiosity rather than judgment, right? We learn this judgment again when we're growing up. This is part of those attachment styles. Notice how you speak to yourself. This is most likely how your mom and dad or carer was speaking to you or to themselves, right? So approach it from the place of curiosity. And I could do many, but I would say the third one would be allow yourself to pause and to really do the inventory of where I am right now, what caused me to get here, again, from the place of curiosity rather than like, well, I haven't done many good things. And then where do I want my relationship with myself and with my partner, with my child to look like in the next 6 months, 12 months, 5 years, 10 years? Take a piece of paper, journal on this, right? Pause, allow yourself to pause, because unless you allow yourself to stop and do this inventory, your autopilot will take over, right? So really doing that and getting clear on what you want, and then asking yourself what needs to change, who can help me, what can help me, right? So I think these would be my top three takeaways. I can do many, but I think these are the bottom lines, because nothing changes until we actually pause and break that cycle. So.
This has been amazing. I had so many aha moments just during these last 3 minutes of you talking about the takeaways. And I wanted to thank you for your reassuring words, because what came up for me is that, you know, by allowing yourself feeling all these things, you can open a whole different can of worms that is not really one, but people think, right? People might think it is one. So thank you for the reassuring words when you said it's not your fault. This is just what you learned. This is just what you've seen, and you just mirrored it. So there is nothing really wrong with you. You have not been useless, but you know, I like the saying, better late than never, right? There is always time and always space to grow and to learn. And you can do no mistake and still fail, right? But also, if you make a mistake, it just proves to you you're growing, you're learning. So thank you for the reassuring words, because we can create our own can of worms just by overthinking and going down the rabbit hole. So I think it's very healthy to know when to stop and actually pause, for real, pause in the pause and take it from there.
Absolutely. And this can be a perfect first step for anyone who wants to go on this journey of changing things and improving their relationships, is to simply allow yourself to pursue what you like, allow yourself to give that time. That's part of taking care of yourself. It's just because we were not given it by primary carers, parents, this is the time where you can choose otherwise. I think choice is an important word here. What do I want to choose from now on? Because when you were little, when you were 1, 2, 3, 5 years old, you didn't really have much choice. Like you pointed out, we just repeated things, we mirrored things, we were little sponges. This was a question of survival, right? So we kind of had to adjust our behavior, we kind of had to shut down part of ourselves. Otherwise, for us, it meant I'm not loved, I'm not accepted. However, now we can change this. So, but one of the things is the best ways to start is like to allow yourself that space, just to pause and see what's actually happening, where you want to go, perhaps from now onwards.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for this amazing time and the time that you took to explain, and I feel so much smarter.
Thank you for your questions. I love them. I think that all the questions that you asked and that were asked today and what we've talked about, I think many people will be able to relate to them, because we can talk about it in a very academic way, but like, I think most of the people, we're all in relationships,
right,
of some sort, right?
Exactly.
And anyone who's in a relationship has an attachment style. Everyone's got attachment style, right? So everyone, I think, will find their own bit in this episode, and I can just imagine that lots of people go like, oh yeah, that sounds like me. Oh yeah, like that's how my parents were, right? So I think we're all in this together, and the important part is that now in this day and age, there are lots of resources, there are lots of ways to help you to change this, to transform the way you love, if so far it hasn't been exactly the way you maybe imagined or wanted. So that's a great thing, whereas years and years ago, maybe it was just straightforward. Okay, you have to get married, you have to have kids, like no questions. And it was, I mean, different things work for different people, but nowadays we have a lot of choice, and support is available. So that's a fantastic thing.
And those are words, right? Choice and support.
Yes,
those
absolutely.
Are my favorite words.
Yes. So yes, it's out there for those who are open and ready to take it, because I love your question at the very start, one of the first questions, where you asked that whether it should be alarming for people. And honestly, it's not alarming for some people. It never will be, but it's a choice as well. But we can also tap into it in the future. There is another thing that then goes into like what kind of mindset we're having, and that's something called victim mentality when we are and again, that's often taught, like we are taught to be helpless, right? So, and we then learn not to take any responsibility. But I believe that's again for another episode, and because I don't want to, I think we can talk for hours and hours. So yes.
Well, thank you so much, Zuzana, for being here today. And
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. I just wanted to give you space and let people know how or where they can reach you if they felt like, okay, I opened this can of worms, not closing it, I need her.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Your audience can reach me through a few different ways, but I would say, I'm active on Facebook and LinkedIn every day, so they can see my posts and they can benefit from a lot of information like what we've talked about today, many tips and scenarios what one can come across in relationships, in their love life, in dealing with conflicts and so on, choosing the right partner. So they can find me under my name, Zuzana Svepešová, the same on LinkedIn. I also have a website, which is www.zuzanasvepešová.com, which is basically my name and my surname.com. So where there is, if they want to contact me, there is a book a call button, which will take you directly to my calendar, so you can choose the date and the time which works best for you. Then what happens then? Normally when I have a call with the women who are open and ready to transform their relationships and their love life, is that we have a chat. It's a no strings attached chat, because what I really care about is and what I want to always make sure that we're a good fit before we go any further and before we start working together. So this call, which is a complimentary call, always help us to see how we feel, like whether we feel like it's a good fit. And when we feel that it is, then we go further, and then we explore like what would be the best way to go forward. And we create a plan from there, step by step, tailored plan, because every client is different. But yes, and that's also the opportunity, that call is the opportunity for me to find out closer what it is that that particular woman needs help with, because sometimes there are a few areas, like we also opened today, there are a few areas that that particular client wants to look at, and a few things that particular client wants to change, but sometimes it's just a minor area. Like, for example, we are looking into online dating, right? How do I do an online dating profile that can work for me and I can attract more matches, right? Or how can I set my boundaries? So that's a smaller area. So yeah, but that's the space for us to discuss that. So yeah, it's my website, where you can book a call, Facebook and LinkedIn. So that would be the fastest way.
Thank you for telling us. Thank you for letting us know. And thank you everyone for watching. We'll be back with Zuzana for another episode talking about fear. So stay tuned. As you could see and hear today, we already tapped on it a little bit, but there's so much more that's so juicy that I hope you'll have many more aha moments just like me today. And be sure to check out Zuzana's Facebook and LinkedIn. I myself have learned so much from her just from reading her posts, not to mention talking to her on a personal level. So be sure to check her out. And again, thank you for watching, and stay tuned for another episode. Bye.
Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.
Thank you everyone for watching. This was it for today. if you have a story you would like to share and this podcast inspired you, please feel free to reach me either via LinkedIn, Facebook, or my personal email address, which is birthwithviviane@gmail.com. I will be very excited to hear from you. And if you like this episode and this podcast, please make sure to subscribe. Thank you. Bye.